Tēnā koutou, no mai haere mai. Welcome to Newsroom, brought to you by Insurance Brokers Alliance. Of course, Newsroom's the place where we talk about all kinds of things from far and wide, local or international. We don't care. We just give you our opinions and from the point of view of our panel. Tonight on the panel, Carolyn Dean, local businesswoman, former city councillor. Welcome to the panel for the first time.
Thank you, Bill. Happy to be here.
I know you've been here before on another show, so you're used to facing the camera.
Yeah.
Malcolm Gayfer, welcome back.
Thank you, Bill.
Malcolm's ex-journalist, broadcaster, a man with plenty of good opinions to share with us, so great stuff. Maurice Rodway, new to the panel for the first time. Maurice, you're interested in the environment on really from a number of points of view, aren't you? Fish and Game, you've worked for them for a number of years, and also a member of Environment Southland.
That's right.
Have I covered everything there?
Oh, that's enough, yes.
Well, a few of your interests anyway. A number of things in the news this week. Of course, one of our main topics down here being the report of the Commissioner, for the Parliamentary Commissioner of the Environment, Dr. Jan Wright, and she's been making comments about the changing water quality in Southland and Canterbury rivers. We're very interested in water quality, particularly in Southland, and she has said through a modelling exercise taking into account data that's been collected by scientists that we really have to take account of the way in which basically the nitrate and phosphate level she was commenting on, wasn't she, Maurice, in our rivers, and says we really have to take a look at this situation and do something about it.
Well, that's right, Bill. The modelling predicts that dairy farming will continue to expand in Southland and Canterbury and other regions of the country, although particularly so in Southland and Canterbury, and we've seen a big expansion over the last 10 years, and that's predicted to carry on. And the models that you talk about, not only do they predict that those changes that will occur, the increase in dairying, and that's an economic type of social model, and then there's another model that they use which in combination with that shows that with the expansion of dairying under the current scenarios, then we will get an increase in nitrate in particular. Phosphorus is predicted to increase as well, but nitrate is the big issue, and Jan Wright brings that up in her report. And nitrate's particularly difficult to deal with because it dissolves in water and gets into the groundwater, whereas phosphorus tends to stick onto soil particles. And if you have riparian strips along the edge of streams, for example, and you can stop the sediment running off into streams, then you can reduce the phosphorus losses quite a lot. But the nitrogen, because it dissolves in the water, gets into the groundwater. The main problem with nitrogen is that it's lost through cow urine patches. And when a cow deposits its urine on the pasture, the amount of nitrate in that is far in excess of what the plants can uptake through the summer. And in the autumn, that nitrate then leaches into the groundwater, and that's where it contaminates it, and it can get from there into drinking water supplies. And we've already got a few hot spots in Southland where the drinking water standard, the World Health Standard, is over the limits that it ought to be, and so it would be dangerous for pregnant women or young babies to drink, and they get a thing called a blue baby syndrome, which is essentially an inability to uptake oxygen because of this nitrate in the water. So it's a pretty serious issue, and nitrate, if it gets to high levels, it can also cause problems in stream with animals and insects that live in the stream, and also to stock, of course, as well. So it really has to be controlled. But as you correctly pointed out, the Jan Wright's report was a modelling exercise, and it predicts that dairying will expand, which you would understand under the current environments, and that if dairying does expand and we carry on using the same kind of mitigation methods and the same type of farming systems, then we'll get an increase in this nitrate, and we will have more hotspots, and we will have more problems with drinking water standards, and then in the rivers as well, particularly in the estuaries. It's the freshwater part of rivers is not quite so bad as far as nitrate's concerned, certainly an issue, and you get a type of algae called blue-green algae, which is not actually blue-green, it's more of a dark brown or even black colour, but it can be toxic particularly to dogs if they eat it, and it's got a neurotoxin in it, and so it's pretty nasty stuff, and that seems to do very well in high nitrate conditions. So you've got all of those issues coming up. Now, of course, this model says that if we carry on doing what we're doing, this is likely to happen. But there are ways that we can avoid some of these things. It's not going to be easy, and Jan Wright's report says that there are mitigation methods that can be used and that we are using, but because of the grass-based system that we have and the cow's urine, which is the main cause or the main source of the nitrate, it's going to be very difficult to fix that. We can do some things like keeping the cows off pastures in the wintertime, and you have these winter barns and things. That can certainly help. And you can have standoff pads where the cows then don't go on the pasture at times when it's really wet, and that can reduce it. There are other things you can do. You can alter the diet of the cows. You can use genetic methods to reduce the amount of nitrate that they produce in their urine. They utilise more of it in their food and milk and that. So there are a few technological fixes, and Jan Wright recognises all of that in her report. But at the moment, the way things are going, it certainly looks like we're going to get an increase rather than a decrease. But there are things that can be done, and the challenge is to really make sure that we work at those and bring about those fixes. One of the most promising things is that you can have a high profitability with dairy farming with things like lower stocking rates. So you're more production per cow, not so many cows. And that's being promoted in some areas of the country as well. So there are some things that you can do, but it isn't going to be easy.
No. So obviously, you know, the city water supply is drawn out of the Reedy River. Malcolm, are you happy about your nitrate levels going up in your drinking water?
Well, I sit here rather alarmed actually, listening to what Maurice had to say. And I suppose one question is, we've had dairying quite prominent in the province, 10, 12 years now? So has significant damage already been done to waterways, groundwater supplies?
Well, there's certainly some signs. As Environment Southland scientists have discovered that in the Reti estuary in particular, there's been quite a big increase in the amount of what they call it macro algae, which is a kind of weed that grows in estuaries, and it causes a problem, especially when it starts to decay, and it can go anoxic and cause bad smells. I mean, that doesn't really affect humans that well, but it certainly is affecting the wildlife that live in the estuaries, because the animals that they eat, the worms and things, they're not so abundant. But Bill, you mentioned about the Invercargill water supply. I don't think at the moment it's just the groundwater. Once the nitrate gets out into surface water, a lot of it gets taken up by plants growing, such as that blue-green algae I was talking about. And so its concentration in surface waters isn't anywhere near the World Health Standards, but it is in some places in the groundwater. And we've already heard in Canterbury where the public health authorities there are warning people in some areas.
Drawing water out of wells.
Yeah, that they shouldn't be drinking it.
And actually, from the city water supply point of view, it's my understanding that it is an increasing problem, and it's increasing cost on the city ratepayers, treating the water that's coming from the Reedy River as a result of what's going on upstream. And you know, in the middle of summer when the river's low, and that algal bloom is what causes the odour and taste.
So we've got a secondary
issue that we have. And so that affects. I mean, we're at the bottom of the whole catchment in the city, so we are the downstream users of the water. So what's happening with this water report and with water in the region is totally affecting city residents.
There's been some suggestion that this is the price of doing business on the dairy farms, and if we want the dairy farms here, and if we want the prosperity which comes from them, then maybe we're going to have to put up with this. Excuse me.
Well, it doesn't appear it's going to improve any though, does it, over the passage of time?
Well, yeah, there are, and I mean, it must improve, really. We have to improve it. We can't carry on, letting the water quality deteriorate. It's just not an option. Water quality, good water quality is such a part of New Zealand. It's our image. It's what everybody expects, and we can't let it deteriorate.
And some of the options, Maurice, are probably going to be less acceptable to dairy farms than others. I mean, some have suggested we should even be restricting the number of dairy farms in the province. And of course, that would be something that the council would, the Southland Regional Council, Environment Southland, would have to make a decision on, wouldn't it?
Yes, well, we're not there yet. At the moment, we're looking at nutrient limits on a catchment basis. So once you calculate how much nutrient is going into a catchment, and therefore you say, right, well, we can't allow any more. So one of the options would be to say, okay, we can't have any more intensification of agriculture because we know that's what causes it. But you could do other things as well. You could have different management systems which reduce the losses I mentioned before about winter barns and standoff pads and different feeds and different, there are a lot of technological fixes there, but they are, some of them are well established, some of them are in the future. So, but it's not an option to allow water to get to a stage that we can't drink it.
Right. One thing I'm interested in, the city water supply, you said Carolyn was suffering from your experience on the council. Has there been a tension between the two councils, one of whom, of course, is basically overseeing the catchment and the other one who's using it? Has there been a tension there?
Not that I have, not that I've felt at this point, but I have had it, mentioned to me when I was Chairman of Infrastructure. This is a problem, this is an increasing problem, we're going to have to address it at some point, and then, the questions start coming up, who's going to pay, how is this going to happen, and I don't think it's anything that sort of manifested itself at this point, and there's always that tension between Environment Southland and the city, sort of back the other way too, with Environment Southland being the regulators with the discharges that come from the city, the sewage and the stormwater.
Right.
So, there's all that kind of thing goes on, but I don't think the connection there is, there's no friction there at this moment.
No, well, it certainly hasn't manifested itself.
Right.
It's actually more of a problem in Gore, because the Gore water supply comes largely from groundwater just upstream of Gore, and there's been a lot of dairy farming development there, and they in fact have new plans that they're developing to control the amount of intensification of agriculture in the water source areas just north of Gore. So while the Invercargill city supply comes out of the river, Gore comes out of the groundwater, and it's really the groundwater that's the issue.
So we're basically, Malcolm, we're looking for, I'm from Environment South, and we're looking to see what they do about this thing, to see how the council, we've read some of the councillors' responses in the paper. I've got to say I wasn't impressed with some of them. The others I was very impressed with.
Well, the question arises now, is there a mandate between the local authorities, the dairy industry, the Fonterras? Is there a mandate to actually recognise that perhaps there is a problem, and where do we go to from here? How do we fix it? And as Carolyn says, who pays for it? And in my opinion, perish the thought, if there is local body amalgamation, then where does it all get put?
You don't agree with that local body amalgamation?
Well, perhaps we can get to that later on. But will
Good
something...
topic.
Did you say perish the thought?
Well, I did say
Pretty sure I said perish.
when a report or information like this just shoved into the too hard basket and worry about it the next decade?
Well, I actually think, Bill, this kind of issue is, if you can take a step back from the councils and regulation and rules, and just take a step back and really look at the issue from a big picture point of view, I think that there will be solutions in innovation. And if we can say, not that our goal is we want to clean up the environment, but if our goal is we want to clean up the environment and we want to earn more money at the same time, then you start to have different ideas.
Yep.
And you start to think about things in a whole different way. So, we kind of we bang on about the problem and we just keep running into the problem. But I mean, for example, different uses of the land. We're investigating oats, we have investigated a lot of different uses, in the past. What about a zip line? What about a zip line on your farm that's got amazing gullies and valleys and hills and things? Earn a whole lot of additional income from a zip line, no environmental impact, heaps of fun.
Explain to
loads
us
of people come.
what a zip line
Well,
is.
a zip line is something you can have on your farm and absolutely no impact on your current farming activity, but it's a tourism operation.
Okay.
It's like a huge flying fox.
Okay.
Big attraction. A lot of people do it. A lot of Americans do it. They're in Hawaii and they're in South America, Queenstown. They're phenomenal for attracting people to do something.
Right.
It kind of meshes the environment and the scenery with the activity, and they're a big money spinner.
Right.
Why not do that instead of having another 200 head of cow on your property?
Right.
Speaking of oats, and I've spoken to one or two people about this, and it could be regarded as the new wonder crop, and I just didn't realise the use of oats and its byproducts, and we could have the world beating a path to our door.
apart from porridge.
Well, porridge would just be a minor byproduct. It sounds as if it's a huge potential there.
For a Scottish society, we should have known this before, Malcolm.
Well, we should have known this before,
Well, oats are really suitable for dairy, for land that's not very suitable for dairying.
Right.
Whole lot of benefits that go with them. There's health benefits, there's less inputs, there's less fertiliser, there's less
And the products and
chemicals.
industries, it can be used and just basically no end to it.
Right.
No end to it.
Pharmaceuticals.
So as you say, when investigations are done, we may well come up with new ideas that solve the problem.
Yeah, but I'm a firm believer you've got to step back from that problem. So when you get right down the line to dairying and inputs into the water, you're kind of at that level and you're focused on it. And as Jan said in her report, she's struggling to see how you can get a win-win situation out of this for the environment and the economy. So that's the time to step back and go, okay, blue sky thinking, what else could we do? What are the other options here?
Right. We're going to stay with the environment. Malcolm, the Andarko drilling ship started today. We were talking about it before the show started.
Yes, indeed. And I do wonder if Greenpeace and those organisations are, doing a bit of grandstanding out on the high seas. I think we have to face it too, that oil exploration on land and at sea is going to happen. And it is obviously happening now. So whether they find anything of this oil field off the Waikato, I think it is very early days yet. But you wonder if that'll transpose, if there are oil exploration activities out off the coast of the Great South Basin, sea and weather conditions, totally different kettle of fish to where they are now. So I have to say, I think the Greens and the Greenpeace probably doing a bit of grandstanding here. And looking for the headlines.
Of course, that's their job, though, isn't it?
That's their
they
job.
are Greenpeace.
Yes. One thing that does concern me, though, is the government have passed this new rule. They'll basically stand on people who do protest against this sort of thing. And I saw a comment from John Key earlier in the week that it's not beyond the realms of possibility. He'll call on the Navy to go in and help sort these people out. Police will be the initial manager of the situation, but Navy could be called in. It's something that's happening out at sea. And that to me is, are we sort of using a hammer to crack a nut here?
Right. Do you feel comfortable with that, Maurice?
Well, just talking about oil exploration generally, I think the bigger picture here, certainly there's a risk of oil spills, but the bigger picture that we're not addressing is the climate change issue. And the whole world is struggling with it. We've seen an increase in storms, and we know, the scientists know now that the Earth is warming up faster than it would have normally, and it's due to human activities. And those human activities are the combustion of fossil fuels, and of course oil is one of those. So this is the really big question. It's an issue that I don't think the New Zealand government is really paying enough attention to at the moment, and it's not alone. There are other governments around the world. All the climate summits they have had in the past seem to come to nothing much. So that's the big issue, and I think the New Zealand government ought to be more proactive in that area, continuing to dig up oil and get it from the ground and use it for all the purposes. It's got lots of purposes, obviously, and lots of uses. We really have to start thinking about using less oil and using more sustainable types of energy.
The whole thing, when it boils down to it, we're talking dollars, aren't we? And all of these things, if someone can make a big buck, it's pretty hard to stop them, isn't it, Carolyn?
It is, and I think that the buck stops with you and me on that one, because why would anybody drill for oil if nobody was requiring it? If we weren't driving to the supermarket and we weren't driving down to the studio, then nobody would, and all the manufacturing that goes on to make these consumer items that we're buying, we're really driving that. And so I think it's quite rich of people to say, well, we don't want drilling, off our shore.
In our backyard.
But then are they doing anything in our backyard? Sure. Yeah. But then are people, what are they doing on a personal level to change that equation, to change that demand, so that that's not going to happen?
If all of us, if the whole of Southland, everybody changed their habits, is it really going to address the world climate problem? I mean, or do we need to be looking beyond our personal commitment to it. And a lot of people really have got a personal commitment. They bike around and whatnot. And do we have to start insisting by some means or other that others change? I mean, it's all very well, we can model the behaviour and whatnot, but others will say, well, you're actually using less oil, which has decreased the demand, the price has gone down, yummy, I'll get a bigger car. Surely that's what happens.
Well, I mean, it all boils down to an economic equation, and it's this you've got the issue with Greenpeace going out and sailing around and the Green Party. They're doing it because their hearts are in it, and you got the same going on with the green groups that walked out of the UN.
Yes.
So their hearts are in it, so they're getting flabbergasted. But for the majority of society, it's an economic equation, and it's you're always going to keep. People are just going to keep doing what they need to do in the short term for that economic equation until something major changes. So, I mean, again, I think take a big step back and say, well, big picture thinking. We need to have a complete change of what it is that we value and how we're valuing things. And it's not coming from countries trying to get together and say, oh, climate change, what am I going, well, we need to do these actions. And no, there's no value in that for them because they really need to do the day-to-day stuff. That's what's going to get them elected again. Right. So, I mean, I agree with you. What the solution is.
Before we go to the break, Malcolm, you're not going to look like you're going to say something. You're poised.
Something profound. I think you'll find that the figures out this year, actual fuel consumption in this country anyway, has declined over the last 12 months or so. So, we've got more efficient motor cars.
Right.
The price, of course, is dictating how we use our motor cars. And so that's caused a levelling off and perhaps a bit easier on the gas. But, of course, petrol is only one use of oil that comes out of the ground. Pretty much everything we do and we touch has an element of the petrochemical industry in there somewhere.
There's one good thing about your nylon shirts, though, and your plastic. It's not going into the atmosphere.
No, and plastic's a byproduct of the refining process. So, it's there anyway. Right,
we're going to go to a break in a minute, but first of all, I'm going to say, Maurice, quickly tell us what's going to happen if we do nothing.
About
as we've got CO2 emissions are rising, if we don't attend to the greenhouse gases, what will be the future?
Oh well, actually, there was a report come out just today, actually, and we will get in Southland in the next 20 to 40 years. We'll have a fairly small temperature increase, actually, only about 2 degrees. But by the end of the century, it'll be sort of 2 to 4 degrees. There's quite a range in there. But other parts of the country will get hotter and drier. So east coast of both islands will get a lot drier. And so there'll be a big change to agriculture, to everything that we do. There's very big impacts with all of that.
So on that unhappy thought, we're going to go to a break. Excuse me, but stay with us because we've got some happier things to talk about when we come back. We'll see you soon. Welcome back to Newsroom. We've had the news, Malcolm, that the Labor leader, David Cunliffe, has said, when we're in government, when we get into government, we will compensate the families of the Pike River victims. And he said, it's 3.4 million, I think they'll have to dosh up, $110,000 per family, and in my opinion, quite rightly too, it should have happened before. And then he says what we'll do is we'll go after I think he said, the directors and the parent companies to recover it from them, and he's going to have a meal with them and get it done. He said, well, the government has a moral obligation.
Who pays for the meal?
Yeah, well, that's right, yes. What do you feel about this?
My opinion is, I think the government's dropping the ball and washing their hands of this Pike River business, actually. And there's a very good article in the Herald from Fran O'Sullivan, who, probably fair to say, is a John Key national supporter through and through, but she really caned them.
Hooks into them,
and no problems there. It clearly tells the government to pay up this 3.41. 3.4, what is it in the overall scheme of things?
So what it's executive salary.
So probably hardly even that, from what it's cost so far. And I read earlier on, I thought it was a disgrace that the shareholders, and I can't remember what the company was, they voted against trumping up their portion of the reparations, which I think was a direct contradiction of a High Court judge's direction.
Judge Jane Farrish.
And I think she caned the operators of Pike River as well. So it's astounded me even to this day that they've voted no, we won't dish out. You know, that's just abrogating the
If
moral...
that's the High Court, that would be justice. Is she justice or judge? I'm not sure.
or justice, I beg your pardon.
I'm just not sure, actually.
Yes, High Court, it's a justice.
High Court, justice, yeah.
So I think everybody seems to be washing their hands of it and hoping it'll go away, which it won't. And of course, we've got this book out in the last week or two from Rebecca McPhee, which I think just paints a horrible picture.
I actually attended a talk with Helen Kelly, the CTU president, last night, and she said the book is, you pick it up, you can't put it down. It's an absolutely must read. And it's just the extremely well written, but just it paints the full picture. And by reading the book, we now know what happened. Not an entertaining book to read, but a very necessary one for anybody who cares about processes in New Zealand.
It's just apparently just a catalogue of disasters from day one onwards. And as I say, I'm eagerly awaiting a chance to read that book maybe over the summer holidays or before.
Carolyn, do you think the national government is failing to meet its moral obligation, or would you agree with Bill English where he says we've met it, there's ACC there, things are in place, and our moral obligation is only to put this right so things don't happen again?
I don't agree that they've met their moral obligation, but I can understand from a political point of view why you would draw a line in the sand and you would stay on one side of that line. They obviously don't want to set a precedent. They've got their line and they're sticking to it. I don't agree with their line. If it was me, I'd be paying out the money. As a taxpayer, I would like my money to go to that cause. I think David Cunliffe's got a good solution. If that solution worked, great solutions. It's, good on him. Timing is interesting, for him to be coming out and sort of making these, kind of jumping on these.
Bit of a coup by Cunliffe, really, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it'll work actually, because most of the people, or a lot of the people who are involved in the operating of Pike River are broke. The company's broke, so it'd be a hard job, I think, really pushing it up.
The directors all broke.
I won't go so far as to say that. But then you're going through the legal...
Parent company was, Coal Court.
Solid Energy.
Solid Energy, yeah.
You're really pushing it uphill, I think. And
although L&M Mining...
I don't think so. I don't think they've...
Not L&M, sorry. It would be one of the other mining companies anyway, yeah.
You'd soon rack up $3.5 million in lawyers' bills trying to chase that amount of money. So... Sorry, Carolyn.
So, Bill, you make a really good point about this, the chief executive's salary. When you compare something like that, the figures that we're looking at today, upwards of 300 grand, for a CEO's salary for 1 year, and a family being compensated for 110,000, it's that. I mean, that is the moral dilemma.
Yeah. Maurice, $110,000 for a family for losing a husband, a brother. It really.
Yeah.
It's a drop in the bucket, isn't it?
Well, they've certainly got the moral high ground the Labor Party has, but I agree with Carolyn. I think it's quite right. It's certainly not going to break the bank, and these people have gone through a really terrible thing, and there's clearly been a lot of fault on behalf of the managers of the mine, so it's the least that we could do for them. I
think you'd be hard-pressed to walk down the street of this town and walk up to a person and say, do you think the government should pay up, and get somebody to say, no, I don't think they would. I really think you would. Yeah. I agree with you. I think they've dropped the ball. I think it's one of the, politically, although I don't think we should even think about it politically, I think it is morally, and it's something we should think about compassionately towards these people, but politically, it's really one of the worst moves they've made. And smart aleck comments being made by one or two ministers aren't helping either.
One or two one's a senior, one's a junior minister.
Yes.
I think that junior minister may regret that in time to come.
Yes.
But no, I think Fran O'Sullivan really, and she also nailed it. She also points to that every man and his dog, when it comes to the cabinet, turned up at all the memorial remembrance services, things like that. One of the good photo op there. Yeah, but where are they now?
Perhaps they would have been better to stay away and contribute the costs of them attending to the families.
Well, this is all rolled out now.
I mean, you can't help thinking up these scenarios, I'm sorry, but it's just, I feel very strongly about it. I think, how could we possibly treat people in this way, with us sitting there worried about precedents and all kinds of stuff like that? Forget the precedents.
And I think the precedent's already been set.
Yeah, that's right. And get on with it. We are embarrassed as a country about what happened in that mine. We are embarrassed as a country that the government had one mine inspector to inspect 100 mines, and that mine inspector hadn't even been properly trained. And we're embarrassed for those families, and all of us want to do whatever we can. That government is there to represent us, not to represent themselves, so you need to get on with it. And put your hand in the government pocket and pay it out, and even pay it out at $110,000. I think it is little enough. If I had my way, it'd be at least 3 times that amount.
I do recall actually the late Sir Paul Holmes, when he was part covering the funeral at the racecourse in Greymouth, and of course everything was very raw at that stage, and he was talking on the radio, and he said, and I remember it clearly, you know, this will prove to be an absolute dog, it'll be an awful, not worse to that effect, it'll be, and I thought, well, hang on a minute here, Paul, we haven't had the funeral service yet.
Yes.
But it's proved to be
Sir
correct.
Paul was a very astute man. He'd been there, done that.
Yeah.
You know, he'd been observing political situations and governments for, you know, many, many years, and I think he
could see it just all unravelling in front of him.
He had probably what he would have described as an unfortunate insight into the future. He didn't need to be here to see it happen. Let's keep on government matters and talk about the referendum that's coming up. You got to vote. You going to vote, Carolyn?
I think so.
You're going to vote? Good, good.
Yeah.
I think we'll have to exercise our democratic right. What good it'll do, I'm not too sure.
It's so interesting to read John Key's comments that it's, you know, they know they're going to lose. Doesn't really matter. Might, you know, it'd be interesting to see if we get more than 1 million votes, which would be interesting to see if, you know, if they get a 25% voter turnout. That will be really interesting.
Yes.
But I think that, you know, if I was in charge of the country, and I was looking at issues like this that are, you know, very significant issues, I like the approach. They've used it for the Land and Water Forum, and they use it for some other major issues too. They bring together a really big group of really diverse experts in a lot of different areas. They could be from the community, they could be science-based, they'll obviously be, you know, economic experts, etc. You bring together a really diverse group of people, and the size of the group means that process is really robust, and you get them to work it out and probably give you a recommendation.
Yes.
I like that approach. I think a referendum, people are going to vote for the wrong reasons. They're going to vote to stick it to the government. And I think people are uninformed when it comes to referendums. When we're looking at the fluoride issue at the City Council, that was one of the suggestions, was we'll have a referendum on fluoride, but what are people informed about it, you know, or are they just sort of ticking a box?
So this is where pressure groups come in, isn't it, and start to manipulate things.
Yeah, and governance by referendum is sort of not really governance. Like, why have a government if you're just going to put everything to a vote?
Of course, if you extend that idea to extrapolate it to its logical conclusion, it says democracy is dangerous, therefore we should have some form of dictatorship. But I take your point.
Well, it's a pendulum. It's kind of like a pendulum swinging, and it goes, you know, well, we kind of we elect a government, so they're meant to be doing a job. But we all want to say all the time, or we all want to say in certain things, so the pendulum swings that way and then swings back the other way. But I think people will vote just to stick it to the government, not necessarily because they're informed on the issues.
Should we just do away with the law, Maurice? Because no one ever takes any notice of these referenda, and the government's sneering at it.
Well, the example that Carolyn gave of the Land and Water Forum and getting a group of experts together, you know, a big group that's representative of the people is a really good one. And the Land and Water Forum was a good example. It got people with different opinions together, and they all sat around and they had several meetings and they made recommendations to the government. Now, it remains to be seen exactly how many of all of those recommendations will be taken on board, but certainly some of them will be, and so it's a good system. But I agree, a referendum is a lot of people probably don't think too much about it, and it could be just on political lines. They think, well, you know, the National Party is against it, so I'll vote for it, type of thing. So,
yeah. And that, I think with that, when you get a lot of people from really diverse backgrounds, like that Land and Water Forum was, they weren't just all experts, you know, they came from all different walks of life. And when you force them to sit in a room together and work through the issues, they do come to some pretty good, solid innovative solutions.
On a matter like asset sales, though, Malcolm, is the government going to really listen? I mean, the Treasury, for crying out loud, had advised them not to sell, and they did it anyway. I mean,
well, I think 3 out of how many have already been sold, haven't they?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're really going down that path, and I don't think much is going to stop them there.
Right. Well, I actually don't think the government, they haven't taken any notice of Treasury. I can't help thinking they're just selling them because they know they can.
Well, they were elected on that mandate.
They say they were elected on that mandate, but they were elected to govern the country.
Well, that was part of their mandate to govern the country.
They said they would do that, but my thought is of a referendum, however, is put of this other opinion, which shows, I mean, does the fact that the government's elected mean that the people who voted for them agree with absolutely everything that all their policies? I think not. No. Not really. And I think perhaps if they were clever, they might have allowed this to go ahead, wouldn't they?
I think we're going down a slightly different road here. If you're going back to the last election,
yes.
They voted for someone who was very popular as opposed to voting for someone who was not very popular.
I would have to concede that. There was a popularity issue there. I want to quote Helen Kelly here, and she says, vote in the referendum, either yay or no, but just vote in it because it will demonstrate how arrogant the government is. They're not going to change their mind anyway. So I agree with Helen's sentiment there, actually. The referendum's certainly costing a lot of money.
How much?
Well, that's the other problem.
It is costing a lot of money. I just saw another ad in the paper, a half-page ad in the paper today.
Yeah.
So I guess we should make it count one way or the other.
Oh, they'll probably get a group discount from Fairfax, so
well, yes.
Take that into account.
But that's very true. They might, yeah.
Well, I'm sure they would.
They could have just done a Fairfax poll. Yes, no.
On Facebook.
Excuse me, do it online on Facebook. Yeah, it might be more modern to do it that way.
Well, that's the way we're going.
Exactly, but it does call into question if these referendum are being treated and used this way. Should the government address the fact that they're not going to take any notice of them, and should that act be repealed? It'd probably be a brave government that did it and says we're never going to listen to you.
Yeah, that sounds.
Should we repeal it, Maurice?
Well, a referendum, as you said before, is not a good way of finding out, the best solution for a particular problem. And I've just been at a workshop today about collaborative decision making, which is very much like the Land and Water Forum that Carolyn mentioned. The government is promoting this in water management issues. And it has a lot of promise, actually. You get people together who are on opposite sides of the fence and you work out their differences and they get to understand each other's point of view. And it takes a long time, but the decisions that you get to at the end of the day are much more robust. The government is really promoting this in the water management area, and I think that it has a lot of promise. It's certainly got some problems, but these can be overcome, and it builds up a level of trust and a community spirit. All of these things are really good, and it flows off into all sorts of other areas as well. So having a referendum, it's not good governance at all.
Right. Stay with us. We're taking a break, but we'll be back with topics of interest. Welcome back to Newsroom. Topics of interest now, starting with you, Malcolm.
Couple of things actually. The Ewan McDonald parole bid declined, perhaps unsurprisingly, and I heard just a few minutes ago actually on News Talk ZB, apparently his work record that he or his people filed to the parole board was slightly embellished somewhat, glossied up, you might say. He's been out on work parties at the golf course and things like that, and he or his people maintain it was perhaps 4 weeks' work, but apparently it's only a matter of days, from what I fleetingly heard. So there's that issue there, and the comment was quickly made. If you're going to do that sort of thing, don't do it in a forum where the media are going to pick it up pretty quickly and see the holes in it all. So that's that. And the only thing I'd comment also about that, there seems to be only 2 people who actually knew what went on in that fateful morning, and sadly one of them's no longer with us. So whether we get the full story out of that, time might only tell. And very quickly, this completely out of the blue, I just noticed a clever piece of marketing by a band of troubadours. The organisation is called the Rolling Stones. And they're coming to Australia and apparently New Zealand in the next summer, or in March actually. But what they piece of marketing I've not seen before. They've advertised one city, and that's Adelaide. And the announcements about the rest will come hither.
Oh, interesting.
Follow. So yes, an interesting piece of marketing. They do say that there'll be one show in New Zealand,
Right.
but when and where the shows in Sydney and Melbourne and Perth and
Right.
what is that? That's all still to come. But
One show in New Zealand.
apparently one show.
Maybe
in
they'll
New
come to Invercargill.
I
We're
don't-
here.
They've been here before.
Oh, good. Right.
And I don't think it was very good at the time.
I say,
part of the
anybody
analysis-
who's been to Invercargill before wants to come back.
Well, you put it to them and see how you go. But that's another story in itself.
Right. And of course, we've got Burt Munro on our doorstep very shortly too, haven't
Well,
we?
yes. I've seen a lot of bikers riding into town today, actually. So great stuff.
Excellent. And we're going to have great weather for it. Leadership's been on Carolyn's mind. Talk to us about it.
Well, we've been talking a lot about leadership today, and so it's always in the news. And being in a political environment, it's so important. And I've just been doing a bit of research lately in terms of what are the traits that make people follow a leader. And the Gallup group have done, they do
Research
a
outfit.
heap of strengths-based, they research strengths and things. They've done a whole lot of research. They've got a study they've done of 10,000 people, and they were asked what traits is it that you look for in a leader that will make you follow a leader. And the 4 traits that people said is trust, compassion, stability, and hope.
Goodness me.
And I think that's really interesting. And
Write
it's
those down.
interesting from the perspective of anyone out there who is in a leadership position. Those are 4 important things to really
Trust, compassion, stability, and hope.
and hope. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And the other thing is that leaders don't have to be themselves. They don't have to be well-rounded, but they have to make sure that they're surrounded by a team that is well-rounded.
Now, John Maxwell is a great, John Maxwell in the United States, he does a lot of leadership conferences, and he says that too, that a very good manager will work out who his leaders are in a team
Yeah.
and use their strengths.
Yeah.
Should
He's
somebody
the-
in the government go back and revisit those words? over
Yeah.
my shoulder?
He is the author of such
Compassion.
sayings as
Yeah.
such sayings as lack of preparation on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine.
Yeah.
Maurice, we soaked up your topic of interest, didn't we?
Yes, that's right, we did before, but actually there's been a bit of talk about local government amalgamation with Hawke's Bay looking
Okay.
at that now. There's been a recommendation from the local government
Looking at
commission.
the regional authority with the city authority.
to combine it,
district.
and there's
Yeah.
a bit of opposition from some of the locals and a bit of support from some of the others as well. So I think that's a question that we will have to look at down here at some
Eventually.
stage. We do have quite good shared services between the councils here at the moment,
Yeah.
and that's the way I think that most councils would like to keep it, with greater efficiencies amongst the councils as they are. But I think the question will come up, and I think there will be more and more pressure for that amalgamation in some form, probably in the next election or one after that.
Yeah.
Well, the government's certainly pushing that, isn't
They
it?
are, yes.
I'm glad we've got time for my topic, which is just 2 minutes, because it is the Employment Relations Amendment Bill, which I'm against. It's going to make it harder for the average worker in a job. The provisions of that bill will mean that collective bargaining is made more difficult. It will mean that the employer will be able to walk away from the bargaining, get a court order to finish that bargaining, and people will automatically go on to collective contracts. Already in New Zealand, we've got 400,000 people on the minimum wage. And there are some really serious statistics out there, like 50% of New Zealand families worry about how they're going to pay the bills. There's a whole lot of stuff. I think we have gone down as far as we can go. Australia, the gap, one of the promises the government made was they said they're going to sell asset sales. And by golly, they've done it. The other promise they made was they said they were going to close the income gap between New Zealand and Australia. Well, the income gap in the latest statistics has got $90 worse to $90 worse. I think it's $210 per week now. So they're delivering on their promises which come from their own philosophies, but they haven't delivered on the promise which is going to help those poor families who are really struggling along. Something we don't feel quite so much in Southland because costs are a wee bit better down here. But I feel sorry for people in some other places like Auckland and whatnot who are really struggling. There are families in this country really struggling. I'm really concerned about it. I think a lot of Kiwis are. So I am vehemently opposed to that bill. I do believe that we should be looking after those on lower incomes a heck of a lot better. And that just leaves me 15 seconds to say thank you very much to the panel, Maurice Rodway, Malcolm Gayfer and Carolyn Dean for being, and we look forward to when you can come back with us again, and thank you for watching. We'll be back, I think we've got one more show before the end of the year in a fortnight's time. We'll see you then.